Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about which are the best chords to use following chord 5 when you're in a minor key. Now that might seem a pretty obvious thing. Chord 5, after all, is the second most important chord in the chord hierarchy. After the tonic chord, the dominant chord, chord 5, is the one that is going to appear more than anything else. And it's a very strong chord. The dominant chord has a pull to the tonic chord. It also has a pull to other chords like chord 6 as well. But I wonder if you're one of those people who finds that every time you use chord 5, you always kind of go the same way. You always go 5 to 1, 5 to 6, never really going anywhere else. So we're going to consider some of the really obvious progressions now, but we're also going to consider some other options that you may not have considered that you might think, actually, that could be quite handy variety, because we're going to make a lot of use of chord 5. Now, just before we get into this, a couple of things to say. First of all, I'm doing all of this in relation to the harmonic minor scale. Why am I doing that? Well, since 1600, the convention has been that you basically use the harmonic minor scale to write harmony. You use the melodic minor scale to write melody. Well, sometimes those two things end up in slight conflict and you have to make adjustments to make sure they fit each other. But I fully accept that there are many people who may be working in a whole variety of musical styles who think, well, I'm not limited by the harmonic minor. In fact, I'd rather write my chords in melodic minor or use the natural minor. That's absolutely fine. And you might still be able to work with this material and adapt it to your particular purpose. But just to make it clear that I'm working in the harmonic minor scale because that's where most people will be. The other thing I just want to clarify is what's going on with the use of these letters. You can see I've got some B's floating about on some of these chords. Well, there are two international conventions when it comes to labeling inversion chords. So A, B, C is one convention. A means root position, B means first inversion, C means second inversion. If you don't write anything at all, you assume we mean A. So if there's no letter after a chord, it's root position. You may have been brought up in the other tradition where we're inheriting the figured bass system from the Baroque period, and we talk about root position chords as 5/3 chords, first inversion chords as 6/3 chords, and we normally abbreviate that to 6. And we talk about second inversion chords as 6/4 chords. And again, you usually don't bother writing 5/3, you just leave it blank, and if it's blank, you assume it's 5/3. Now, on the board, I've got various progressions we're going to work our way through in just a moment, and the B's are the only inversions that I'm referring to. So if you're used to B, no problem at all. If this B thing freaks you out, just think of any of those B's as 6, and you'll be very happy. Okay, let's consider 11 possibilities of places we can go from chord 5. Option 1 is the most obvious, 5 followed by 1. That's something that so many pieces of music do. And of course, it's a cadence formula, so it often happens at the ends of phrases. Okay, option number 2 is perhaps another very common progression, 5/6. Again, it's another cadence formula. Not that options 1 and 2 have to be used at the end of a phrase exclusively. They could be used anywhere else in a phrase, but they're kind of the most obvious places to go. Okay, let's look at option 3, and this is going from 5 to 2B, but then back to 5 again. So that's an interesting thing to consider, you know, starting on 5, going somewhere else, coming back to 5 before we go on again. And I'm suggesting here 2B, so 2 in first inversion, simply because 2 in a minor key in the harmonic minor scale is a diminished chord, so it can sound a little bit ugly in root position with the kind of exposed tritone at the outer points. Put it in first inversion, just tends to mellow the chord a little bit. It hides that tritone, so it's not at the bottom and the top. Also, it gives us a kind of smoother bass line. So to go from 5 to 2B and back to 5 is not a bad progression, but it's one that lots of people haven't thought about. So 5 to 2B to 5, or 5 to 2B to 5 and then on to 1. Or 5 to 2B to 5 and then on to 6, So you can kind of use options 1 and 2 and tack either of them onto the end of option 3. So 5 followed by 2B is definitely worth considering. Have a think about option 4 for a moment, where I'm going 5 to 2B to 1B. Why am I suggesting this? It gives you a lovely smooth bass line. I'm working in C minor, as you'll have gathered. So in C minor, option 4 gives me G, F, E flat. So kind of scalic bass lines are sort of quite handy, and you can get that by going from 5 to 2B and then think, well, instead of just going to 1, if I go to 1B or 1 in first inversion, I just get that nice progression in the bass. Okay, now option 5 may seem much more radical. Well, I've designed it to be. And it's kind of following on from the previous piece of thinking. And it's this. Let's have a think about this one. 5 to 2B to 3 to 7B to 1. Okay, now that may seem slightly strange because chord 3 in a minor key is often the least likely chord to be used. If you do use it, you tend again to use it in first inversion because it's an augmented chord. But there's a reason for doing it in root position here, and it's simply to preserve this kind of scale-like movement in the bass again. And 7B, well, 7 is another diminished chord like 2, so tends to sound slightly cleaner in the first inversion. But you see the bass line here in C minor is great because it's going G, F, E flat, D, C. So it's a great progression moving away from 5. So often 5 goes to 1, 5 goes to 6 is something quite kind of final and concrete, but 5 moving on through a series of other chords. You see what happens in this option 5 that I'm presenting is that you've still got an outline progression that starts with 5 and finishes with 1, but we've got all these other chords going on between. 5, 2B, 3, 7B, 1. So there's another thought. Okay. Option 6, 5, 3B6. Whoa, why would I want to do that? Well, 5, 3B to 6. Now, what's happening there? Well, 5 and 3 both have the G and the B in the case of C minor, our example key. So you've got 2 common notes, 2 common tones, which means that 5 to 3B, while it's pretty unconventional in the sense that lots of people don't think about using it, you've got 2 common notes, so why not? To go from there to there, and then you've also got E flat as a common note onto 6. So it's kind of quite useful, isn't it, to have 2 common notes and then 1 common note to give you a progression. So an unusual progression, lots of people wouldn't consider that, but works pretty well. And it's an unusual move on from 5. Okay, well, we could do option 7. It's fairly straightforward, isn't it? Going from 5 to 4 to 5. Now, lots of textbooks say you can use chord 4 followed by chord 5, but you shouldn't really go 5 to 4. Well, yeah, you've got to be a little bit careful with that. There's some dangers in going 5 to 4, but actually, it can be used very effectively, particularly if you can get some contramotion between the top and the bottom parts. If you can't just go 5, 4, 5, you're going to be loaded with octaves and fifths. But if you can get yourself organized so you're going in contramotion, you won't have that problem. And it's another thing where if you're wanting to kind of settle on 5 and you want to put another chord in between, but you want the 3 chords to be quite strong, well, just thinking, well, what are my kind of primary chords? So 5 to 4 to 5 is, quite a good one. I mean, you can go 5 to 1 to 5, so 5 to 4 to 5. works pretty well. What about the next one? Well, yeah, we're going 5 to 4 to 1. Okay, what about option 9? Well, what are we doing this time? We're going 5 to 4 to 6. And again, common notes. In 4, in C minor, you've got an A flat and a C. You've also got those two notes in 6. So 5 to 4 to 6. And you could carry on, couldn't you? 5 to 4 to 6, 5, 1. It could progress on somewhere else if you wanted it to. So there's another option. Option 10, 5 to 4 to 7B. Okay, 5 to 4 to 7B. Okay, so 7B, we've talked about that once before here. But we've also got, you've got F in chord 4. You've also got F in 7B. So the 4 to 7B is not quite as crazy as you might think, but there's another instance of going 5 to a 4 and then 7B. Well, you could go on from there. 1, 2, 7B, 5, 1. Could be a good progression, couldn't it? So thinking of using 5s earlier in a phrase. Option 11, to go from 5 to 7B to 1. We've kind of hinted at that one earlier on. So do you see, we've got lots of different possibilities for what we can do with 5. Some of those are pretty standard, pretty obvious, but I'm hoping that I've maybe suggested 1 or 2 there that you thought, oh, never done that before. Let's have a play with that and see if it works. So that when you do use chord 5, you don't always do something predictable with it. Or when you look back through something you've written, do you think, you know, every time I've used 5, I've followed it by 1 or I've followed it by 6. So other possibilities to consider. So have fun working with chord 5 in some new ways, hopefully. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, you might want to go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Lots to look at there, blogs to read, all sorts of information about stuff, opportunities for individual help if you want that. You can also access our online courses because we've got courses in theory, harmony, oral analysis, orchestration, sight reading, huge range of stuff there, all material designed to resource the musician. And while you're there, have a little click on our Maestros page because you may be interested in joining Maestros. Well, what's Maestros all about? Well, all sorts of exciting things, fun things, emojis and badges on offer, but also early access to videos, behind the scenes material, all this kind of stuff. But in addition to that, you can join us for our monthly live streams. So 2 of those in the month. The first usually involves a fair kind of teaching input from me on a topic that's often been suggested by members of the group. So we can kind of go deeper and have a bit more time to work than we have in the space of one of these sort of videos. Also means that people can ask questions and feedback and share ideas, which is great because we run a live chat through it. Then the second live stream is when people submit scores, recordings, whatever they want to do of either themselves playing something where they would like some feedback, or a composition, a piece of harmony, an arrangement, work in progress, whatever it is. And I'm very happy to give one-to-one evaluative feedback, but we share all this in the group so we can all learn from each other. And people so often tell us that for years they've just been treading this lonely trail, and it's so wonderful to be part of a global community where they can feel that mutual support, realize that other people have had the same successes and struggles, and also just kind of seeing what other people are doing and thinking, actually, you know, maybe I'm on the right lines, and maybe also I've learned a few things that I can take away from this. So some lovely friendships growing out of that as well. You can be fairly passive members of the group if you just want to observe it. You can be as active as you want to be, involved in the live chat, involved in the submissions, entirely up to you. Anyway, have a look and see if it's for you.